All right, so that puts the Bears up at number 11. And this is where I think you wouldn't love this, Sam.
I would not.
So the Bears have traded down from 9 to 11. They picked up pick 90, which, again, that's good. But they picked Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU, the consensus number 4 wide receiver on the draft board. So from a Bears perspective, pass up Rome Odunze, but you get an extra pick. Add Brian Thomas Jr. to the mix. I do like, if you dropped him into that receiving core where DJ Moore is your high-volume, do-everything guy, and Keenan Allen is your high-volume slot possession guy, and Brian Thomas Jr. becomes your deep threat. I do like that fit with the Bears. You and I just don't love Brian Thomas Jr. as a receiver as much as others.
Yeah, in terms of rounding out the skill set of the receiving core that's already in the building, it is a good fit. He brings something that isn't immediately present with the other receivers on that roster. It's not. DJ Moore can go deep. It's not like he can't be a deep threat, but it's not. You wouldn't say it's his greatest strength. Keenan Allen at this point isn't really a deep threat of any description. Tyler Scott is the only other guy really on the roster that you would say could be that player, and at least in terms of an immediate Brian Thomas Jr. is bigger, longer, et cetera, with the same kind of speed as Tyler Scott. So it does make a lot of sense from that point of view. This is just where, this is where I say, look, the previous one, I made the argument that our chances of correctly identifying which of 3 really good receiver prospects will be the best one is minimal, right? The year where it was Jerry Jeudy versus CeeDee Lamb versus Henry Ruggs, it was actually Justin Jefferson who was the best receiver of the 3. Now, Dallas fans will argue, hey, it's actually CeeDee Lamb.
They're plenty happy with Lamb. But yeah,
point being, of the 3, it ended up being door number 4 that was actually the best. And even if it was the third guy off the board, right? Or was he the second, CeeDee Lamb? Either way, it wasn't the first one, right? So your chances of picking that guy, I think, are smaller than people think it is. That being said, at some point, I think there's a large enough gap in your evaluation of what you believe the prospects to be that you don't take the 4th guy. And this would be where I think there's that case. To me, the current projection of the big 3, Harrison Jr., Odunze, or Neighbors, is so much higher than what I think Brian Thomas Jr. will become at the next level that I would be massively concerned by this trade of dropping down 2 picks and then picking number 4.
Yeah, that's why I think the Bears are in a fascinating spot at 9 because they only have the 4 picks. Let me just confirm. Can we confirm that? Okay, they only have the 4 picks.
So we picked up a 5th one here.
But because there's a world where there's 4 quarterbacks going ahead of them in the top 8 picks, the Bears will have that blue chip discussion, right? Can I get the last blue chip player versus adding more picks? And usually I'm in the camp of add more picks, but it's not like they're an old team. They've gotten young. They've added a ton of picks over the last couple of years. It's not like the Bears have to go and draft 15 times. They spent their 4th rounder to go bring Keenan Allen in. There's a reason why they only have the 4 picks that are good reasons.
Yeah. So to me, this is a case of, if you trade down, I don't have a problem necessarily with trading down from 9 to 11. My problem would be trading down from 9 to 11 and then going from Odunze to Brian Thomas Jr.
No, I get it. I understand.
If you're trading from 9 to 11, in my opinion, the move now is to pick a different position and come back in the 2nd or 3rd round and get a receiver. If you come back in the 3rd round with one, even with the pick you're picking up, with trade down from 9 to 11, that's giving them pick number 90, right? Was that what we said?
Yeah, the last consensus. Well, let me do that right now.
So what about it with pick number 90 instead of taking Brian Thomas Jr. with pick number 11, you come back with pick number 90 and get, maybe Tez Walker is available with pick number 90.
Jermaine Burton, potentially.
But imagine if you can do that, right? Trade down from 9 to 11, instead of passing up on Odunze and picking Brian Thomas Jr., you pass on Odunze, you pick Latu with pick number 11.
You'd rather have Latu and Tez
Walker versus Brian Thomas Jr.
Brian Thomas Jr.
and
plus
whoever a 3rd round edge rusher is.
Well, 3rd round edge would not be great.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, Austin Booker would be good. He's in the 90s there. He's more of a developmental edge rather than the surer thing in Latu.
Latu might be a home run pick based off his data profile, and I'm not sure there's any difference between Tez Walker and Brian Thomas Jr. in terms of prospects. I would much rather that as a strategy than simply taking the next receiver on the board at 11.
Yeah, and the data that I posted the other day, edge rushers in the 1st round, they'll become I'll use starters just for now. They'll become starters about 65% of the time. 2nd and 3rd round edges will become starters about 25% of the time. But you can actually find receiver starters in the second and third round much easier than you can edges. So it goes back to that.
Particularly this year,
the way the receivers are.
And I think Latu, by the way, might be a wildly undervalued prospect this year based off his data.
Yeah, you wrote about that last week, PFF.com. And
well, a lot of it became framed as this, and we did it as this sort of better production versus better athlete. But actually, when you use things like PFF gas, like Latu was a 99.7, I think, percentile athlete on the field. And his workout at the combine was way better than people were expecting it to be. Like, Latu might actually be a significantly better athlete than people are giving him credit for, functionally on the field rushing the passer. And then you go, well, okay, so what does the production look like? Well, his production is up there with like Chase Young and Nick Bosa as some of the best we've ever seen. 12 guys have had a PFF pass rushing grade over a season with a serious workload. So I think I set a threshold of like 300 pass rushing snaps over a season. So 12 guys have done that in the time we've been grading college football, so a decade basically. I think only 2 guys have done it twice, Chase Young and Latu. Might be Nick Bosa as well, but almost none of them have done it twice. 8 of the 12 have become Pro Bowl NFL players. Now, that's helped by the fact that the Pro Bowl is kind of a joke, and guys like Chase Young fit into the Pro Bowl category.
No, it's fine. But list the names. That they're all very good players.
Yeah, it still means he's a better than average NFL player as a pass rusher, which is not easy to do. And one of the guys that hasn't become a Pro Bowler is Latu, who just hasn't been drafted yet. So my point being, if you were putting a bet on anybody from this edge rusher class, Latu would be where all of my money was going, and maybe I'd throw a couple of bucks hedging on one of the other guys. He's the guy I'd be betting on.
I'm with you, man. And he goes at 12 to the Denver Broncos. We're on the Latu train. We mentioned it a lot here on the show. I thought your article was good, and it's good. To me, that's how you use data. That's how you use the PFF data, especially in data points that do translate at the next level. Look at how it has. We've been pretty good at pinging pass rushers, both edge and defensive interior.
That might be the strongest area of grades from college to the NFL translating. Like, if you find a guy that is exceptionally good rushing the passer at the college level, he is almost always, it turns out, good at the NFL level. As I said, it's like 8 out of 12 that have become Pro Bowlers. Now, the 3 that aren't Latu, have missed hard. Like, they're nothing, right?
Yeah.
But generally speaking, if you find those guys, particularly against a high-level competition, they're going to be good.
So Latu goes 12th to the Broncos here. And obviously the Broncos, the next 2 picks are interesting because these are very difficult spots for the Denver Broncos at 12 and the Las Vegas Raiders at 13.
Just to wrap up, to somebody in the chat, Christian says Chase Young is a bust. Chase Young is only a bust relative to the draft spot, right? He was the number 2 overall pick. Number 1, if he's a bust, it's because injuries have knocked his career sideways. And number 2, he's still a pretty good NFL pass rusher. If you got Chase Young, but you drafted him 17 overall, you would still consider that a reasonable draft pick. It's only because he was the number 2 overall pick. He was the best pass rusher to enter the league in years. He's only a bust relative to expectations as opposed to is a bad NFL player.
There's also some massive misinformation going on in the live chat here on YouTube.
Oh,
massive.
What do we got?
Jared Goff.
What?
Jared Goff.
Jared Goff?
Goff.
That's somebody's name in the chat?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
This might be Walt may have snuck in through Jared Goff. He said these guys loved Tyree Wilson for the Raiders.
What?
Well, that's just a lie.
You would struggle to find people that were lower on Tyree Wilson.
Tyree Wilson's becoming my Christian Hackenberg. It's just let me just, in case you haven't heard, in case you haven't listened to the last 17 hours of content here, in case you haven't heard, we were very low on Tyree Wilson.
I don't know that there was a person lower on Tyree Wilson than you were.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I didn't like him, but I wasn't willing to put him 128th on the board or wherever you wanted him.
Yeah, my real board was there. For content purposes, I think I put him as edge 5.
Only because we argued you out of it. We had the way the board was put together last year, we had 5 or 6 of us all put together our own big boards and essentially amalgamated them into a consensus. And you were the Russian judge for Tyree Wilson. We were like, dude, you can't put him 160th on your board. It's ruining him on the consensus board. You're that low on him. You were dragging him down 28 spots on your own. And we were like, that's too much. And it wasn't, apparently.
And then And then someone else says, you all said Jermaine Burton is wide receiver 4. I mean, we just need people to get the information correct.
Literally you.
I said
That's
that.
it. Only you.
One of my biggest pet peeves, Sam, it's tough to get away from this, is when PFF said. It's like there's a lot of us at PFF. We all say different things.
Yes.
We all say different things. And there's also people, I just want to bring this up really quick while we're here. There's people who give reactions, and I just want to explain this. Like, oh, you guys don't trust your grades. And it's like, well, we don't list our grades in order and make that the draft board, because that's not how you use data or data. It's not how you use it. The way you just use data, which is looking at Latu's profile and looking at it historically and saying, hey, guys who produce at this level, overall, I feel pretty good about their ability. Whereas like a Dallas Turner, not that big of a, like guys who produce at his level, they don't produce at the NFL level as much. Therefore, the data says, Latu might have a better chance.
Just for the record, I had Burton at wide receiver 7, and that's with a giant asterisk on him to say that's without factoring in any off-field stuff, which is his biggest problem.
Oh yeah, the off-field is people are searching. Well, forget it. There's not a lot of nice things being said about Jermaine Burton behind the scenes.
No,
but I'm saying the skill. So I don't really care. I'm not predicting he will be the 4th most best receiver. I'm just saying skill-wise, based off film, Jermaine Burton is a first-round player for me.
The grades thing, though, like if you've listened to this podcast for any period of time, you would know at no point do we say simply look at a grading number and nothing else. The grading number informs other data. It is a piece of the puzzle, and you have to factor in the various layers of context that do not get put in to the grading, right? Deliberately, because you don't want to arbitrarily determine what that should be worth. So, great example of this class. Marvin Harrison versus Malik Nabers. 2 amazingly good prospects. Nabers has the better grade, right? But Nabers' quarterback might go number 2 overall, and Harrison's quarterback just transferred to Syracuse, right? From Ohio State. That hasn't gone well from the quarterback's point of view.
There's definitely something to it.
Why does Marvin Harrison not have as good a grade as Malik Nabers if he's a better prospect? Well, the quarterback situation was wildly different, at least last year. Obviously, before that, he had C.J. Stroud. But the point being, you can't. If you were just looking at the number, you would say, well, Nabers is better. But we know that quarterback influences the grade, so we don't say that.
Yeah, so all that's good. One last thing I'll respond to, DBB in the chat. Why did PFF destroy the Bears in this mock? Again, it's not PFF. It's not PFF.
The market.
Arjun did. Go blame Arjun.
Blame capitalism.
Arjun, based off the market, we just did, I thought, a pretty intelligent segment on the Bears and how we might do something differently in the scenario where they traded down to 11. So if you didn't hear that already, rewind it and listen. So your guy, Latu goes number 12 to the Broncos, and then the Raiders take cornerback from Alabama, Terrion Arnold, at number 13. So the Raiders are plus 175 to take a corner on DraftKings. So that's where that's coming from. Again, this is a market-implied mock draft based off of betting odds by position, by player, various data sources. How could the draft play out here?
So the Broncos thing is interesting, right? Arjun has said that the Broncos are heavy favorites to take a quarterback at most sports books, but with the top 4 signal callers off the board, it doesn't seem like Sean Payton would reach for QB5 here and build around him. I don't agree with that logic because it assumes Sean Payton's board looks the same as everybody else's. If Sean Payton thinks that Bo Nix is not QB5 or simply loves QB5 in Bo Nix, he'll take the quarterback there.
Yeah. I mean, the Sean Payton aspect of this draft is one of the biggest storylines to me. It's this, and again, forgive us for repeating ourselves, but the fact that the Broncos don't have a second-round pick, Sean Payton feels like a guy who's impatient, even though he has a long runway here with Denver.
Sure.
So, can they stomach a rebuild? Right? I felt like Sean Payton didn't want to stomach the rebuild in New Orleans, right? Dealing with a post-Drew Brees world. And now they're in Denver, do you want to stomach the rebuild? You're eating all this dead cap from Russell Wilson. Will the Broncos actually be patient? Will they take this as a rebuild year? And if that's the case, take the best player and grab a quarterback in round 3 and grab Spencer Rattler later and roll with Jarrett Stidham and see what happens next year in the draft. I don't know if Sean Payton's the guy to do that. I just don't know if he is or not, right? Does he want to do that? I think most people would say, no way, Sean Payton, of course he's going to take a quarterback. Whether it's Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr., just give him somebody, he'll make him work. So that number 12 pick for the Broncos, whether they try to trade up or take QB 4 or 5 there, one of the biggest storylines in the draft.
Yeah, I just think it's a mistake to assume that everybody has the same draft board. And just because the consensus top 4 guys are off the board does not mean that it's Denver's top 4 guys. Like we've talked before about how Bo Nix appears to be unusually, it seems to be an unusually natural match with Sean Payton's type of offense, right? It's the type of quarterback generally. I'm not saying that Bo Nix is Drew Brees, but stylistically there are some similarities there, right?
Yep.
In terms of what he does well, in terms of the areas that you would say are strengths. So it's entirely possible that Bo Nix on Denver's board is not QB5.
So, I mean, again, we're just going by market implied right here. This is how Arjun's done it. Laiatu Latu, I mean, I would love that pick for Denver outside of, hey, they still need a quarterback.
Right.
Terrion Arnold for the Raiders. He's going ahead of Quinyon Mitchell in this particular mock draft. We've talked about Arnold. I don't know if we'll end up doing a cornerback ranking show, but as we've said before, I think you and I love the way he plays man coverage. Incredible overall one-on-one, man-to-man skills. And I think that would be a good fit for the Raiders at 13.
Mm-hmm. Yep, like that a lot.
Saints at 14 are going Olu Fashanu, the tackle from Penn State. And, it comes back to Trevor Penning at left tackle, potentially being replaced after a couple seasons, and then Ryan Ramczyk still dealing with his knee injury. The most recent reports coming out of the owners' meetings for Ryan Ramczyk is that he's a little worse now than he was at the end of the season, which isn't great, where he's eyeing a potential career-ending knee injury. Either way, something that could affect his future.
Yeah, when your chances of being the starter at the start of the following season get worse between the end of the season and midway through the offseason, that doesn't feel like a great trajectory for your chances next year.
That puts anything else on.
So if you did that,
Saints,
right?
yeah.
Let's just say you made that move, Fashanu in particular. What would your starting tackle? Because if I made that pick, I would put Fashanu at left tackle and flip Penning to right tackle, even though that's kind of an archaic way of viewing tackles.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be fine with that too. It's archaic. To me, it's archaic from a team building standpoint. It doesn't mean, but then it comes down to, okay, I've got these 2 players on my team. Would I rather have the mauling run blocker at right tackle? Would I rather have Fashanu as the left tackle? I think because Fashanu has higher upside, right? Best pass protector that we've seen. I don't want to mess with him. I don't want him flipping.
I also feel
I'd rather have him at left tackle where he's comfortable, and Penning, who's already not playing that well at left tackle, just flip him.
That's the thing.
So that's how I would make that decision if I have those guys on the team, which is different from I think left and right tackle are equally valuable.
Yeah. I feel like Penning has already struggled at left tackle, so we might as well see if he can do any better on the right side. And if not, we're moving on from him anyway.
For sure. I am with you. I would not mess with Fashanu. I think he could be one of the better pass protecting tackles. My comp for him is Laramie Tunsil, broadly smooth and pass pro, questions in the run game. And Tunsil's not bad in the run game. Fashanu, I think, has a longer way to go than Tunsil. But, Fashanu at 14, I think, fascinating pass protecting tackle to take there. Mm-hmm. Colts at 15, take Quinyon Mitchell, cornerback. Another one, I think the Colts are coming out and saying, hey, we like our young guys. We like our young guys. But they're currently plus 110 on DraftKings to draft a corner because the Colts roster, as we've said in the other mock drafts, there's not glaring holes there. Now, I would definitely want to add a playmaker. I would definitely want to add a vertical threat to go with Michael Pittman Jr., to go with Josh Downs and the tight ends that they have there. But Brian Thomas Jr. is now off the board. And, on paper, I still don't love their corners, even if they do. They're young, and I think Quinyon Mitchell fits their profile. Unbelievably athletic, really productive. It still fits what the Colts would want to do, even if they do like the corners that they currently have on the roster.
He's only 6 foot rather than 6'3", so he's not like right at the top of the the relative athletic.
All their
scores.
Guys are 6'2", 6'3", with crazy length.
He's only a really good athlete as opposed to a stupidly good athlete.
Yeah, but I like Mitchell. I mean, I don't know where the odds have Mitchell as the top corner off the board, but I wouldn't be surprised if he is. Ahead of Terrion Arnold. If you flipped those guys in this mock draft, I wouldn't be surprised. I think Mitchell's an absolutely in play for the Raiders at 13, maybe even a little bit higher.
And with Gus Bradley as the DC, theoretically, they're going to be playing the type of defense that Quinyon Mitchell has done the most of. Off coverage, playing a lot of zone. Like, the big projection for a lot of teams with Mitchell is how does he do when you put him up at the line of scrimmage, make him play press man. Like the Senior Bowl was a big experiment effectively for Mitchell to see how he could do with that stuff, because at Toledo he just didn't do any of it. The Colts will be one of the most natural teams to say, don't even care how he does that. We're going to play him like we did at Toledo, where we know he's good.
Yeah, there's the scheme fit, the athleticism. There's definitely a good fit for what the Colts want to do.
Yeah.
Seattle Seahawks at 16, Troy Fontenot, the tackle/guard, going to Seattle.
Yeah. So presumably a guard in this case.
Yes, unless there are injury concerns on the right side with Abe Lucas. But yeah, Fontenot, I mean, they have two starting guard, competition for two starting guard positions. So I would assume Fontenot kicks in here. But the Seahawks are currently minus 135 on DraftKings to take an offensive lineman. So that number is really interesting, given the fact that they do have two starting tackles who they just drafted 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And they have the guard question. So that really only leaves, by the way, the guy who's getting a ton of buzz over the last week because he just had his pro day.
Graham Barton.
Was Graham Barton. And when you hear people talk about Graham Barton, we had Jim Nagy on the show here who said, we liked him as a center going into the Senior Bowl. A lot of people projected him to guard. And our friend Nate Tice from The Athletic loves Graham Barton as well. Might have him as a top 10 or 12 player on his personal board. And he thinks Barton can play tackle. So you are talking about the NFL, or enough people in and around the NFL saying Graham Barton from Duke is a potential 5-position player. And I think Fontenot is a tackle/guard potential. So those two players.
Well, he went the other way. Everyone assumed he was a guard. And then we saw his workout numbers and his measurables. You're like, those are prototypical tackle numbers and movement skills.
He's just short, but he's got the arm length and he's got the movement skills to play tackle. So Fontenot and Graham Barton are two of the bigger wild cards in this draft, because so many teams, if teams are drafting for need and factoring in need, they could play guard, they could play tackle, they could fit in for so many different teams in the first round.
Well, I think the wild card element of it is so many teams need guards and there aren't any in terms of like the first round talents. And even the centers, teams don't like taking a center as high as the mid-first round. So Matt Miller had one of his sort of scouting notebook dumps was Jackson Powers Johnson, right? Oregon center, getting more buzz.
This was a ridiculous.
No, it's not. It's a
stupid note.
It's a perfectly reasonable note to make.
Because
everybody was saying he's been one of the guys post season whose stock has kind of gone up the most, right? Everyone loves Jackson Powers Johnson. He's amazing. Looked great at the Senior Bowl before he got hurt. All this kind of stuff. Workout, fantastic. Data is amazing. He's allowed 3 pressures in 3 years, something like that, at center. He's the darling of everybody. But Matt Miller was simply pointing out that generally the NFL doesn't seem to be as high as him as everyone else, but only in terms of they think he'll go at like pick number 25, which is where centers go in the first round.
Exactly. Right? That's why it's a ridiculous report.
It's not,
he's 24th.
Because the point being,
he's 24th on the consensus board right now.
Right,
the report is Jackson Powers Johnson's going to go where most people expect him to
But
land.
in a lot of mock drafts, people are putting him up at pick number 16.
Just because of the fit, just because they need a center.
Yeah, but the point being, his point is simply that even though you think this guy's an amazing prospect at center, centers do not get drafted this high. So now you're looking at all these teams in the middle of the first round with an interior offensive line need, and you're saying they're probably not taking a center that high because teams don't. The top guard on most people's board might actually be a tackle, and the other top guard on people's boards isn't even a guard. He's a tackle, center, maybe guard. So this is what I'm saying. Like, if you need an interior offensive line in the first round, all bets are off because there really aren't any guards.
No, there's not. There's no pure guards.
And teams don't take centers that high. So you're going to get either weird picks or projection picks where you're taking guys like Fontenot and moving them inside.
Fontenot is currently 21st on the consensus board, most commonly going to Seattle at 16. Graham Barton currently 29th on the consensus board. But like I said, good workout last week, and hearing a little bit more buzz around Barton. So Seahawks and Fontenot, though, pretty common pick in mock drafts. Again, we're going market implied 2024 NFL mock draft. Arjun Menon over at PFF.com, just recapping where his picks come from, and it's all based off of data over at DraftKings, based off of specific player props or team props and what they're expected to do. That puts the Jags up on the board at pick 17. They went Nate Wiggins, the cornerback out of Clemson. The Jags are minus 115 to take a corner with their first pick per DraftKings.
Mm-hmm. And I love this pick. I mean, Nate Wiggins could easily be the best cornerback in this draft. He's certainly got the coverage skills for it. And I mean, I thought this at the time. Like, he weighed in at the combine ridiculously light. What was his number? Like 170 something?
Yeah.
And, but I always felt like even though he was listed extremely lightweight, he had the frame to be able to put more weight on and wasn't an Emmanuel Forbes type of corner where you're like, this guy is playing at 165 and it's going to be a problem for his entire career. Immediately, I mean, he ran, 4.27 at the combine, and then added 10 pounds for his pro day and showed that he's already up at 180 something. I think there's room for more size as well. So now you're taking a guy that might have the best coverage skills, and you can probably play him at 190 pounds in his NFL career. So he's got the size as well.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Wiggins. He's a good athlete. The size, the size and 40 discrepancy thing. You've watched a little Wiggins. Do you feel like he plays that small? Because I think that's the bigger issue. And then, recency bias is a big thing. Emmanuel Forbes was in the 160s last year. Does Emmanuel Forbes and his struggles, he struggled last year. He struggled when he was on the field, especially against the Eagles and A.J. Brown, and then got benched. And, I liked Forbes as a player and everything, but our team's just going to say, never again, we're not taking corners that small.
No, I mean, I think he does get physically overpowered at some times. But I think part of that is, once you get him, I think you can pack a bit more weight onto him. Like, if he was playing at 173 pounds, I would be a bit concerned. If he's playing it closer to 190, I have less concerns about how he's able to physically hold up against some of these bigger, powerful receivers.
Harry's mock draft the other night. That's where I knew I saw this recently.
Did you figure out how Harry had managed to just give the Chicago Bears pick away?
No, I posted Harry's mock draft 2.0. So I give him the iPad and just kind of let him go.
Go nuts.
And I was throwing some advice at him. I was like, don't just pick the best need. Don't just pick the need. You look at the board. Balance this thing out. Never take an RB. I told him, don't take an RB. Just don't do it. So he's got all this advice, and at one point he was wheeling and dealing, and he tells me, hey, the Saints traded up, or no, the Rams traded up with the Saints and took Latu, and I'm like, wow, that could really happen. I love that. And then I go and I look at the mock draft, and then somebody points out that the Bears picked first and second.
Yeah.
And so he didn't tell me about that trade. I don't know what happened, but it was probably Ricky Williams-esque. So the Commanders got every Bears pick for the next 3 years, and the Bears picked Caleb Williams and Drake May in 8-year-old Harry's mock draft.
Yeah,
That's my assumption.
That's a very Steve move. Just take two quarterbacks.
I mean, the reactions were great, and as somebody said, if you hide behind the child, it does ease the negativity just a little bit. I mean, there's still fans in there like, do you even know the specs that my team uses for arm length, and you're picking the wrong guy? It's like, I'll pass it along to Harry.
Yeah.
But Harry had Brock Bowers going at 18 to the Bengals, and apparently the market implied mock draft also has Brock Bowers at 18 to the Bengals.
Yeah, the market has been trying to give the Bengals a high-end tight end for years. It just doesn't seem to ever happen. So it would be fascinating. You would assume that if Brock Bowers was sitting there at 18, it would be a need and fit match too good to turn down. But, they have turned them down before.
I would love this fit.
Sure.
I would love this fit for the Bengals. I mean, if you talk about the wide receiver, T. Higgins insurance, just adding another playmaker, and the idea that, you in your Joe Burrow era here, you're trying to compete with the Chiefs in the AFC and in the Bills, and you're trying to keep up from a firepower standpoint. Get Brock Bowers into the building. Absolutely.
Right. They added Mike Gesicki, but that's not going to stop you drafting somebody like Brock Bowers.
No,
obviously,
this is the long-term play here.
Chase, Higgins. They lost Tyler Boyd in free agency, but they have the duo from last season to come in and try and replace that.
But that's where Bowers, like Dalton Kincaid was going to be the slot receiver for the Bills. Brock Bowers becomes your Tyler Boyd replacement, competing with Charlie Jones and Eusebius. But why not?
Yeah.
Josevic.
What?
What's Princeton's name?
Yosivas.
Yeah. Third time. Nailed it. Eusebius. Yosivish.
One of them is an SH. It might be
Yosivas.
Yosivas.
Princeton. I love that pick, though.
And then Mike Gesicki is obviously more of a slot receiver than he is a tight end as well. So it's a whole bunch of slot options.
Some of the tackle options dropping here in the market implied draft, I think that's an interesting one where oftentimes I think the NFL likes to take their tackles in the top 10 to 15, and there's starting caliber tackles that are dropping a little bit here. Rams up at pick 19. They're taking Byron Murphy, the second, as another interior defensive lineman with Aaron Donald's retirement. The Rams were plus 150 to take a defensive lineman, but now minus 160 to take a defensive lineman.
Because of the Aaron Donald retirement.
Because of Aaron Donald's retirement. That, I think edge is very much in the mix here. Like if Latu drops or if Jared Verse is on the board, I would probably lean edge because they do have Kobe Turner.
Yeah.
On the interior. They don't need to necessarily directly replace Aaron Donald.
It is kind of wild that the Donald retirement made that much of an impact to the market when you consider that Turner is there. It's not like Turner replaces Aaron Donald, but I mean he had the second half of the season that Jalen Carter had at the start of the season, like the first half. So he looks like a legitimate impact playmaker in his own right. And generally when you have one of those on a defensive line, like teams aren't clamoring to find the second one. I mean, it's not like it's a bad thing to have two of them, but usually when that's the dynamic, like we weren't mocking another defensive tackle to the Rams over the last 10 years. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I would probably go edge here. I would probably go with Verse if I'm the Rams. If I'm taking a defensive lineman, but I like Byron Murphy as well. I'm interested to see where him and Johnny Newton go in this first round.
Murphy is a particularly interesting combination with Kobe Turner, I think, because the thing about Murphy is even though he, is that sort of classic 3-tech shape, 300 pounds, standard sort of quote-unquote undersized defensive lineman, like he was strong enough to play nose tackle at Texas, even though they had Tavondre Sweat there. Not all the time, but like they had him in nose tackle alignments at 300 pounds. Meanwhile, the dude that's 360-something was not necessarily lining up a nose tackle. So Murphy, because Kobe Turner is absolutely a penetrating 3-tech,
right.
Smaller guy. So Byron Murphy next to him, it doesn't just give you two guys that can rush the passer that can both align in 3-tech. It gives you one guy that actually can line up inside while you have Kobe Turner taking the one gap open side.
And remember, I'm not going to say they're going to do this with everybody, but they like to move Donald around. Donald played a lot of 5-tech over the last couple of years, over the tackle, and then he would play wide, way over the outside the tackle and actually rush as an edge. They're not necessarily going to do that with their players, but they're willing to move guys around. So it's not like they don't need another interior defensive lineman. It's just they've had an edge rush issue for a while, and I think they would like Jared Verse there at 19. Steelers at 20, taking Amarius Mims. I think this is a very common one that you're going to see here, and the Steelers taking another Georgia tackle. You can have Mims step in at right tackle, move last year's first rounder Broderick Jones to left tackle. Receiver could be in play here for the Steelers, but once again, they're in that no man's land. If you're trusting the consensus board and Brian Thomas Jr. is off the board, the next chunk of receivers are generally in the high 20s from a ranking standpoint. Again, that's not necessarily going to keep them from drafting a receiver at 20, but Pittsburgh also has this great history of second-round receivers,
right.
And then they get into the scarcity issue. Let's get the tackle first. Let's grab the troublesome receiver in the second and profit in both instances.
And we now get bookend Georgia tackles.
Yeah, I think that's a common one.